PowerPlayChess, brought to you in association with Kagi. I'm looking at the game between Gukesh and Harikrishna from round 7 of the Tata Steel Masters. So this is a clash of generations. We have the 18-year-old world champion Gukesh playing against Harikrishna, who's 38. Incredible, 20 years between them. But, I mean, these players know each other very well. Of course, they're both from India, but more recently, Harikrishna was actually a second for Gukesh during the World Championship match. So, a very interesting clash. So here we go. E4, E6. So Gukesh faced this in the World Championship. Would he repeat his Steinitz variation? No, he doesn't go for knight c3. Instead, he plays the advance. And I have a particular interest in this as I considered this on the black side of the position in my book, my new Anti-Sicilians book. How do you get to this position via a Sicilian? Well, you can do it through the Alapin. And now my recommendation is e6 and d4, d5. And then, well, e takes d5 is the most popular choice, but white can play e5, and then we're in the advanced variation. So, anyway, here we go. Bishop d7. Now, this is the move that I recommend in the book. I think it's the most flexible move. I think there are certain advantages to playing bishop d7 and not queen b6. I think it's best not to commit the queen too early. Bishop b2, knight e7. So the knight looking to come to either f5 or g6. So basically black is concentrating on development. An exchange, and then knight f5. So putting a little bit of pressure on pawn d4. Knight c3 and a6. Well, that's a useful move for a few reasons. Sometimes stops a piece going to b5, but it also prepares this move queen b6 as well. Now, in the book, I mainly considered bishop g5 here. But Gukesh played king h1 after almost 16 minutes thought. Looks a little bit strange. In fact, one sees this move quite often in the advanced variation. And there's a strategic reason for playing this and also a tactical reason. So the strategic reason is that white is preparing to advance with g4 to push away that knight, which takes some of the pressure off d4. And black has tried lots of moves here, but Harikrishna goes for rook c8, which is kind of the recommended move. And I mean, one question is, why not push g4 immediately? Actually, after this, and now often white goes for f4 and a quick f5. In fact, black is doing fine after this. Queen is actually a little bit awkward for white. After, for example, f5, then h5, and this is definitely looking good for black. Don't forget there's a pawn that could possibly be taken once that g-pawn moves. So Gukesh played rook b1 here. We'll see the point of that in a second. Queen b6 played. Again, looks like a very decent move, pretty normal move. So now there are 3 pieces attacking that pawn on d4. And I would say here that a normal move for white, a standard move, is just to play bishop b3. So you can see the rook on b1 protects the pawn on b2. And then after this, well, after the exchange, then the position is about equal after this, for example. Roughly level. Don't think black has any difficulties. But Gukesh likes to mix things up. We've seen this. He loves complications. He likes calculation. And he goes for g4, which is a much sharper move. And yeah, I guess he's been signalling that with king h1. Of course, with the queen away from d8, then there's no longer a possibility of knight h4. Now, very quickly, Harikrishna backed down with knight e7. And, well, it's, as we'll see, it's unbelievably complicated. But let's just focus on this position because, in fact, it's not necessary for the knight to retreat. Okay, first of all, let's deal with this one. What about knight f takes d4? Well, now we're going to see the tactical point behind king h1. After bishop e3, white is going to win material because of this pin. The point is, with the king on h1, knight takes f3 isn't check. So you can just take the queen. Of course, if it were check, then the queen could just slip out of danger. So knight f takes d4, not possible. However, incredibly, knight c takes d4 is possible. I wonder whether Harikrishna considered this at all. Probably not if he moved instantly. This is possible and seems like a very decent way for black to play. So, well, what's going on here? What about just pawn takes knight? Well, in that case, black can exchange on f3 and play rook takes c3. That's the point. Black recovers material. There's a pin here. Now, this is still very complicated, but basically black should be fine there. After the game, Gukesh said that he was considering this. Now, instead of allowing this, knight takes d5, so that attacks the queen, so that has to be taken. And then bishop takes f3. So material is even. Gukesh said he thought it was just unclear. In fact, black is okay. The computers show that black is absolutely fine here. And I think one of the points is that after d4, very often black can get counterplay by playing bishop c6, and white is a little vulnerable on that diagonal. Both d4 and bishop c6 are playable for black. But okay, I'll leave you to investigate that yourself. But knight e7 played instead. I think it's very interesting that Gukesh is willing to go for this. I think we have very much have a clash of styles here. Gukesh, loves these sharp, unconventional positions. Harikrishna is a more strategic player. So, perhaps Gukesh thinks, well, this is my best chance of getting him if I stir things up. Bishop e3 played, yep, supporting the pawn. And h5, of course. And this is the drawback of playing g4, that black can upset white's kingside. Now, after this, well, that has real potential for black. So g5 played. Now, g6 is a solid move. You might think, well, what's the point of that? Well, Harikrishna played instead knight f5, which of course looks absolutely normal to come back to this fantastic square. Looks at the bishop, looks at the d-pawn, but it allows g6. That's why it might have been better to play g6 first. And this opens up the king side. So if pawn takes, then rook g1. There we go. That's a nice use of king h1. And white is opening things up. So Harikrishna played f6. And now we've got a really interesting position where black has these nice centre pawns. But what's that pawn doing on g6? It's a really bizarre position. Bishop d3, putting some pressure here. Knight e7, supporting the knight and also looking at this pawn here. Rook g1, supporting the pawn. And bishop g7 all looks pretty normal. Knight a4. Gukesh said afterwards that he was considering queen b4 here and wasn't sure about this position. Thought it's pretty unclear. It's hard to say. I mean, it's black's the exchange down. This pawn is pretty weird on g6. but that's a strong centre. Instead, queen d6 played. At this point, I would have thought knight c5 looks like the right move to hit the pawn, but also, looking to exchange off the bishop, which could destabilise the centre. I mean, maybe Gukesh was worried about this exchange sack again. I don't know, it's hard to say. But he went for b4. He wants to try and break open the queen side. But after b6, just preventing the knight coming into c5, feels like Harikrishna is doing okay with black. b5. And now at this moment, I think exchanging off that bishop and playing a5 has to be right. And that knight, yeah, of course, it is looking at the b6 pawn. But apart from that, it feels a bit stranded. I think black is doing okay in this position. But instead, after almost a 20-minute think, Harikrishna exchanged on b5. And now, these pieces really are in the game because they're both hitting the pawn on b6. But still, a very unusual position with white's king side actually quite insecure. So I guess that's what Harikrishna was banking on. He's prepared to give up this pawn and he's looking to get counterplay. So this is the game. And now bishop h6. So he's starting to target that pawn on e3. That's where he's pinning his hopes. I think hoping that white is just a bit too split with pieces on the queen side and these pieces over here. Knight a4 played. So yeah, that knight wants to come back to c5. Knight f5. I mean, this does look quite dangerous with the pieces hitting e3, and maybe Harikrishna has seen this and thought, well, if rook e1, defending the pawn, it's possible to take here. And after this, queen f4 is tremendous for black. Black is breaking through there. But in these really complex positions, this is where Gukesh really shines, and he found really the only move to keep in the game. Rook c5. And it's so complicated. If bishop takes pawn, queen b7. What a fantastic move. Hitting the rook and threatening mate. So this g-pawn is proving its worth here. In fact, and likewise knight e3, queen b7. In fact, after this move, the computer points out rook c8 and assesses the position as equal. The point of this is that after queen b7, black can block along the 7th rank with queen c7. And it's still roughly level. But instead, Harikrishna took here. And then he took on e3, so he was desperate to take that pawn. But after queen b7, this is good for white. So mate threatened, the bishop came back, and rook e1. And this is a problem. Harikrishna put the knight back, and knight takes pawn, and now very clear advantage for white. It's possible that Harikrishna overlooked that after queen f4, which at first glance looks pretty good, defending this, attacking this, but white has this tactic, queen takes bishop, and knight e6. Forking king and queen, so white remains a piece up, or is a piece up there. So rook e1, knight f5, knight takes e6, and this is now excellent for white. This is an extra a pawn, but more than that, white's pieces are fantastic, and black is just really passive here. Rook b8, queen f7 check, knight takes bishop, and rook e7. So yeah, checking doesn't make any difference. The king will be able to step up the board. So rook g8 defending the knight is forced, and obviously with black so passive, this is just a horrible position to defend. And that's another pawn in the bag. Queen check. Yeah, now watch out for this one. And the knight is able to shield the king. Yeah, if queen c2, then the king can step up here. And after check, then the queen can interpose, and white is winning the endgame. So f5 played to shut out the rook. Rook c5, but now at 2-pawn advantage, and yeah, with care, this is winning. So there's a few checks, and then the king stepped up. In fact, the king is safe. h4, don't take that pawn, because then that starts to get very interesting for black. So king f4, just keeping everything nice and tight. A check. Rook e5. The king is safe enough. Queen d6. King g5. The queen came back again. And now position was repeated. King f4 and queen d6. But, well, according to the notation I have, Harikrishna resigned in this position. Well, if king g5, if they want to repeat this position, I mean, this is winning for white. The king is perfectly safe on g5. Black is just too passive. For example, after h3, knight g5, queen e7, threatening knight f7, and it's absolutely hopeless. So anyway, Harikrishna, according to this notation, resigned in this position. I think, once again, Gukesh shows that he's very comfortable in these really wild positions where, you know, his ability to calculate really pays off. And yeah, Harikrishna just lost his way in those complications. Although, in fact, his position out of the opening was absolutely fine. So, let's have a look at the standings after 7 rounds. So we're over the halfway mark in the Tata Steel Masters, and 5 players share the lead. Abdusatorov, Gukesh and Pragyanananda all on 5 points, with Fedoseev just behind on 4.5. So anyway, it's the kids that lead the tournament. Abdusatorov is 20, Pragyanananda 19, and Gukesh 18 years old. So, you know, the young generation looking really good. So, well, who do I think is going to win? I think, I mean, it's obviously wide open, but Gukesh, I think, is the favourite actually still, because I'm looking at his remaining opponents and he has still to play numbers 11, 12, 13 and 14. The players at the foot of the table. So Warmerdam, Van Foreest, Mendonça and Eric Geisty. But, of course, anything could happen in the remaining 6 rounds. So they're playing again today, Sunday, 8th round. I'll be reporting back tonight. Thanks for watching.